Have you ever wondered why God's plan unfolds the way it does? The book of Exodus is a breathtaking journey of deliverance, filled with moments that defy human understanding and showcase divine power. Why a burning bush? Why part the sea instead of another path? These aren't just stories, they're carefully crafted revelations of God's character and purpose. Let's dive into 10 pivotal moments in Exodus and uncover the deeper truths that reveal God's purpose, provision, and promises for His people. Are you ready to explore how this ancient narrative still speaks to us today? Let's begin. Have you ever wondered, did Pharaoh really stand a chance, or was his heart doomed from the start? Discover the truth behind one of the Bible's greatest mysteries, Pharaoh's hardened heart.
You've heard the story, how God supposedly hardened my heart. But let me set the record straight. Was it truly God who turned me stubborn, or was I simply showing my true colors? Everyone assumes that I, Pharaoh, was merely a puppet, manipulated by the God of the Hebrews. But the truth is far more revealing. God didn't reach into my chest and twist my heart to stone. No, He simply knew what was already there. In Exodus 7 verse 3, God said He would harden my heart, but that wasn't a magical spell. It was a statement of fact. He saw my pride, my arrogance, and my unwillingness to bow to anyone, especially a God worshipped by slaves. Every time Moses demanded, "Let my people go," I resisted, not because God forced me to, but because I couldn't bear the thought of losing control, of bowing to a power greater than myself. God knew I would dig in my heels. He merely let my own stubbornness run its course. Each plague wasn't about hardening my heart. It was about revealing it. The truth is, I hardened my own heart, and God simply let everyone see it for what it truly was.
The Passover Lamb and unbroken bones. What do the unbroken bones of the Passover Lamb reveal about God's ultimate plan for redemption? The answer may surprise you.
Have you ever wondered why we were told not to break any of the lamb's bones during Passover? What could be the reason behind such a specific command? I still remember that night, the night we prepared the Passover lamb, Exodus chapter 12 verse 46. My family and I were huddled together, following every detail of God's instructions through Moses. As we roasted the lamb over the fire, my father reminded us, be careful not to break any of its bones. At the time, I didn't really understand why that mattered. It seemed like such a small detail in the middle of everything else happening. But now, I think I get it. God was using that night to paint a picture of something much bigger. The unbroken bones of the lamb weren't just a random rule, they were a sign pointing to a promise. Later, I learned that this was a foreshadowing of another lamb, Jesus, who would come to save His people. Just like the Passover lamb saved our ancestors from death, Jesus would save us from sin. And just like we didn't break the bones of the lamb, none of Jesus' bones would be broken, even as He hung on the cross. John chapter 19 verse 36. So, that little detail was actually a huge promise, a hidden clue about what God was planning to do for us in the future. It's amazing how God hides such deep meanings in the smallest things.
Aaron's perspective, the miracle of my blossoming rod. A dead staff that blossoms with life. Was it just a miracle or a sign of God's chosen leadership? Join me as we uncover the truth behind Aaron's blossoming rod.
Have you ever wondered why God chose to make my rod blossom overnight? What was He trying to tell us through that miraculous sign? I can still remember the shock I felt when I saw what had happened to my rod. People had begun to grumble and question Moses and me, whether we were truly the ones God had chosen to lead. It wasn't the first time doubts had crept into the hearts of the people, but this time, God decided to show them something undeniable. He told Moses to gather the leaders of each tribe and have them bring their rods. We left them in the tabernacle overnight, and God said He would reveal His chosen leader through a sign. The next morning, when we returned to the tabernacle, I could hardly believe my eyes. My rod, just a simple piece of wood, had not only sprouted, but it had budded, blossomed, and even produced almonds. Numbers chapter 17 verse 8. It was as if God had breathed life into what was once just a dead stick. At that moment, I understood something profound. This was not just about proving that I was chosen. It was about God showing His sovereignty. He was the one who decided, not by anyone's effort or merit, but by His divine will. The blossoming rod was a symbol of how God can bring life to what seems lifeless. How He can transform even the most ordinary into something extraordinary. God's sign was clear. He alone has the power to bring forth life and purpose. even from something that appeared dead and lifeless. This wasn't just about me. It was about His faithfulness, His sovereignty, and His ability to bring order out of chaos. And as I looked at that rod, I knew that I was simply an instrument in His hands, chosen for His purposes, not by my own power, but by His grace.
As we explore these incredible wonders from the book of Exodus, you might be noticing just how profound and thought-provoking God's plan truly is. If you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss out on more insights like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.
The unbreakable nature of the first tablets. What made the first tablets so unique, and why did they break? Uncover the deeper truth about God's unchanging covenant with His people.
Have you ever stopped to think about why the first tablets were broken? What did God want to show us through the unbreakable nature of His law, and why was it necessary for them to shatter? I will never forget the day I carried those tablets down from the mountain. They were no ordinary tablets. They were engraved by the very hand of God, the Creator Himself, with His commandments written in stone, Exodus 31 verse 18. They were a direct and perfect expression of His will for us, His people. The weight of them in my hands was overwhelming, not just physically, but spiritually. I knew that they held the very foundation of how we were to live, how we were to honor God and one another. But as I descended from the mountain and saw what was happening below, how the people had turned to idolatry and were worshiping the golden calf, my heart broke. I felt a surge of righteous anger, not only because of their sin, but because I knew what the tablets represented, God's perfect law, given to us as a covenant. And here we were, breaking that very covenant. In my anger, I threw the tablets down, and they shattered into pieces, Exodus 32 verses 19 to 20. It wasn't just a moment of frustration, it was a deep, symbolic act. The tablets were unbreakable, and yet they broke. They represented the perfection of God's law, but they were shattered by our disobedience. It was as though the broken tablets were a visible representation of our broken relationship with God. The law, so perfect in its form, could not be upheld by us in our imperfection. Yet, as painful as the sight of those shattered tablets was, it was not the end. The breaking of the tablets was not a symbol of God's final judgment, but a symbol of the reality that, without God's grace, we are incapable of fulfilling His law on our own. And even in our failure, God showed His mercy. He instructed me to carve out another set of tablets, and once again, He would write His law upon them, Exodus 34 verses 1 to 4. The first tablets were broken because of our sin, but the new tablets were a sign of God's continued willingness to give us another chance, a fresh start. The law had not changed, but the opportunity for redemption had been extended.
The bitter waters of Marah turned sweet. Imagine standing before bitter waters in a scorching desert, only to see them turn sweet. What lesson was God teaching His people at Marah? Let's find out.
Ever wondered why God would lead us straight to bitter waters after delivering us from slavery? Was there a hidden lesson we were meant to learn? I'll never forget that moment at Marah. We had just witnessed God's incredible power at the Red Sea, and we were filled with hope. But then, after days of walking through the desert with nothing to drink, we finally came upon water. The relief we all felt was overwhelming until we tasted it. The water was so bitter, it was undrinkable. I could see the frustration and despair in everyone's eyes, especially the mothers trying to soothe their crying children. I couldn't understand why God would bring us to water we couldn't drink. But then, Moses did something that seemed so strange. At God's command, he threw a piece of wood into the water, and just like that, the bitterness turned to sweetness, Exodus 15 verse 25. At first, it seemed like just another miracle, but as I reflected on it later, I realized there was a deeper meaning. God was showing us something beyond quenching our physical thirst. The bitter waters were like a mirror, reflecting the bitterness we carried from years of slavery. By making the water sweet, God was teaching us that He could heal even the most bitter parts of our hearts and lives. That piece of wood was a sign that with His guidance, we could find sweetness even in the hardest moments. It was as if God was telling us, "Trust me, and I will turn your hardships into blessings."
The bitter cost of disobedience at Meribah. How could one act of disobedience cost Moses the promised land? Discover the powerful lessons hidden in the waters of Meribah.
Have you ever stopped to consider the weight of disobedience? How something as simple as failing to trust God's word can lead to consequences we never imagined. I can still feel the sting of that moment, the weight of my failure. It was at Meribah, a place that should have been a simple stop on our long journey through the wilderness. The people were thirsty, once again complaining about the lack of water, just as they had so many times before. But this time, my patience was worn thin. Their grumbling echoed in my ears, and I grew frustrated. How many times had God provided for us? How many miracles had we witnessed? Yet here they were again, questioning God's provision. God spoke to me, telling me to speak to the rock before the people, and it would bring forth water, Numbers 20:8. He had commanded me to speak, and I knew that obeying him would bring the result he promised. But in my anger, I struck the rock instead of speaking to it, twice, as though my actions could somehow force God's hand. In that moment, I didn't just strike the rock, I struck the trust one had in God's plan. I allowed my frustration to overshadow my faith. And though the water still flowed from the rock, the consequences of my disobedience were clear. God told me that because I did not honor him as holy in the sight of the people, I would not be allowed to enter the promised land, Numbers 20:12. The cost of my disobedience was more than just a broken moment. It was the loss of something I had longed for my entire life. That moment at Meribah became a turning point in my journey. It was a stark reminder that even when we are leaders, even when we've witnessed God's mighty acts, our actions still carry weight. Trusting God means obeying him fully, even when it's hard, even when we don't understand. I had let my anger cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I learned that the cost of disobedience is far greater than any momentary frustration or impatience we might feel. It's a painful lesson to share, but one I hope others will remember, that our obedience to God isn't just about doing what's asked, it's about honoring him in the way we respond to his commands. When we disobey, we're not just challenging a command, we're challenging the very trust God is asking of us.
Moses' perspective, the deeper meaning behind the plague of darkness. Darkness so thick it could be felt. Was it just another plague or a reflection of spiritual blindness? Let's explore this shadowy mystery together.
Have you ever wondered why God chose darkness as one of his signs against Egypt? Was it simply to frighten Pharaoh, or was there something deeper behind it? When I stretched out my hand and darkness fell upon Egypt, it was no ordinary darkness, Exodus 10 verses 21-22. This wasn't just the sun hidden behind clouds, it was a darkness so thick, so absolute, that you could feel it pressing in on your skin. For 3 days, the Egyptians couldn't see a thing. They couldn't even leave their homes because the darkness was so overpowering. But here's what you might not realize, this wasn't just about turning off the lights. God was striking at the heart of Egypt's beliefs. The sun god, Ra, was the most revered deity in Egypt. Pharaoh himself was thought to be Ra's embodiment on earth. By plunging the entire land into utter darkness, God was showing Pharaoh and all of Egypt that their so-called gods held no power against him. It was a message that no matter how powerful they believed their gods to be, there was only one true God who held authority over all creation. For us Hebrews, however, there was light in our dwellings. God was making a clear distinction between his people and the Egyptians. He was reminding us that even in the darkest times, he would be our light, our guide, our protector.
The burning bush's continuous fire. A bush burning but never consumed. Was it just a miracle or a message about God's eternal nature? Let's dive into the fire's hidden symbolism.
Have you ever wondered why God chose to reveal himself through fire? What was he trying to show me in that moment? I was just an old shepherd, minding my flocks in the wilderness, when I stumbled upon something that would change my life forever, a bush that burned, yet was never consumed, Exodus 3 verse 2. You might think it was simply a dramatic way to get my attention, but there was so much more to it than that. You see, the fire wasn't just about spectacle. It was a symbol of something far deeper. It showed me the nature of God himself, a power that burns with intensity but does not destroy. God was revealing to me that he is a consuming fire of holiness and purity, yet he sustains and preserves life. In that continuous flame, I understood that he is eternal, unchanging, and ever-present, even in the harshest desert places of our lives. When God called to me from that fire, I realized He wasn't just showing me His power, He was showing me a glimpse of His heart. It was a promise that, just as the bush was not consumed, His people, even under the harsh oppression of Egypt, would not be destroyed. And though I was reluctant, He assured me that He would be with me, His fire lighting the way.
The significance of Moses' staff turning into a serpent. What if a simple wooden staff could hold the power to challenge an empire? Join me as we uncover the incredible message behind Moses' staff turning into a serpent.
Have you ever wondered why God chose a serpent, of all things, to demonstrate His power? What was the deeper message behind turning my staff into that slithering creature? You've heard the story, how God turned my shepherd's staff into a serpent when I stood before Pharaoh, Exodus 7 verse 10. To most, it seemed like just another miracle, a flashy sign to catch Pharaoh's attention. But believe me, it was much more than that. You see, in Egypt, serpents were symbols of power, authority, and even divine protection. The cobra was emblazoned on Pharaoh's crown, representing his supposed dominance over life and death. So, when my humble staff transformed into a living serpent right in the midst of Pharaoh's court, it was a direct challenge to Egypt's power. God was showing that the authority of Egypt, no matter how fearsome, was nothing compared to His. And when my serpent devoured the serpents conjured by Pharaoh's magicians, it was God's way of proving that His power would swallow up all other forces that dared oppose Him.
The mystery of the Brazen Serpent. Why would God command His people to look upon a serpent for healing? Discover the surprising meaning behind a brazen serpent and its connection to salvation.
Have you ever wondered why God commanded us to make a serpent out of bronze? What deeper meaning could there be in looking at a lifeless serpent on a pole to be healed? It seems strange to think about now, but I remember the moment clearly. The Israelites had been grumbling and complaining once again. They were tired of the manna, tired of the journey, and had lost faith. And so, as always happens when we turn away from God, the consequences came. Venomous snakes were sent among the people, and many were bitten and died, Numbers 21:6. The people cried out to God, realizing their sin, asking me to intercede for them. God, in His mercy, gave me a strange command, to make a bronze serpent and place it on a pole. Anyone who had been bitten could look at it and be healed, Numbers 21:8-9. It seemed almost too simple. How could looking at a bronze snake possibly heal someone? But God's ways are often beyond our understanding. As I watched the people approach, looking up at the serpent, I began to see something more. The serpent was a symbol of the very thing that had caused their suffering, their sin. The bite of the serpent was a reminder of their rebellion, their disobedience, their turning away from God. And yet, through this symbol, God was offering them healing and restoration. He wasn't just healing their physical bodies, He was offering them a chance to turn away from their sin, to look to Him for mercy and forgiveness. I also began to understand a deeper truth about this bronze serpent. As I look back on the years of wandering, I realized that, like the serpent on the pole, Jesus Himself would one day be lifted up, John 3 verses 14-15. He would take upon Himself the weight of our sin and, through His sacrifice, offer us the ultimate healing, not just from the bite of a snake, but from the bite of sin itself. In that moment, I realized that this bronze serpent, though a symbol of judgment, was also a symbol of God's redemptive power. The mystery of the brazen serpent is not just about a moment of physical healing, but about God's willingness to heal us spiritually when we turn our eyes to Him. It was an invitation to repentance, to humility, and to trust in God's provision for salvation.
The wonders of Exodus remind us that God doesn't act without purpose. From the miraculous signs in Egypt to the intricate design of the tabernacle, every wonder points to a God who desires relationship and trust with His people. As we've explored these 10 wonders, we're left to marvel not just at what God did, but why He chose to do it that way. Perhaps it's because His methods are meant to challenge our doubts, deepen our faith, and draw us closer to Him. What wonder in your own life might God be using to reveal His love today? If you've enjoyed this journey through Exodus, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insights into the hidden gems of the Bible. Let's continue uncovering the timeless lessons that shape our faith and inspire our lives.